There can be a lot of mindsets that block relationship repair, but there's one really insidious one that comes up more often than not, and that is perfectionism. Perfectionism is a silent relationship killer, and especially if you're trying to win your ex back, you're trying to repair a relationship, you're trying to grow a relationship, perfectionism is going to be the one thing that blocks it from happening. Hidden perfectionism could be the massive disruptor killing all of your intimacy in your relationship. So in this video, I'm going to talk about how you can spot insidious perfectionism in yourself and finally eradicate it in order to save your relationship. People get this thing in their mind that perfectionism is about high standards. You know, we're fed this idea through movies, through social media, through this grind set idea of having extremely high standards, like nothing short of perfection is the best. But the problem is that perfectionism isn't just about having high standards. It's oftentimes a big defense mechanism. It's secretly a shield against fear. But instead of it protecting you, this shield ends up isolating you, and it destroys any chance of reconnection and growth between you and your partner. So I want to show you how perfectionism shows up and why it blocks real repair. So what does perfectionism actually do to connection? I want to dig into why this mindset destroys emotional bonds. Perfectionism is a really insidious disruptor because it destroys the foundation of what we call emotional safety. Now, I've spoken a lot about emotional safety, so I won't dig too much into it, but emotional safety is the space to be able to express yourself without fear of negative consequences. Perfectionism gets in the way of one of the elements of that, which is authenticity. And there's been a lot of research into this. Oftentimes, when we have perfectionist tendencies, it's come from like childhood or parents or teachers or even previous relationships where love was conditional. You earned love by good grades, good behavior. So over time, people adopt perfectionism as a protective state. For example, if you grew up in a home where approval depended on your achievements or emotional restraint, then you learned early that love had to be earned, not given. So sometimes in homes, whether it's growing up or through previous relationships, homes that are chaotic or unstable, often people double down on performance in order to create order and create a sense of safety. This performance, this perfectionism ends up becoming a way of earning love, right? You're only to be respected if you exceed people's expectations, if you're bringing in a lot of money, if you're extremely tidy, if you're extremely quiet about your emotions. This perfectionism can be ingrained in ourselves, and we end up developing this mindset that we have to somehow earn respect or love from someone else. And over time, this mindset hardwires the belief that your worth is always on the line. You start to see love as something that you must continually prove that you deserve. What happens is over time, this creates a really deep fear of rejection. So instead of risking emotional exposure, speaking your feelings in a vulnerable way, you often default to control, which is managing how you're seen, hiding anything that could look like weakness. So this perfectionism shows up by wearing this mask of everything's fine, I'm dealing with it, I'm handling it, I'm doing really well, even when you're struggling. And over time, this need to avoid mistakes becomes a little bit obsessive. When you are struggling with perfectionism, vulnerability can feel dangerous, so you keep it locked away. And that's the core of perfectionism, not just high standards, but a relentless drive to avoid any risk that could threaten your place in the relationship. So how can this look in daily life? Perfectionism can play out as emotional suppression. So let's say you feel overwhelmed at work, you're stressed, you feel stuck, but you don't share it. You don't talk about it because admitting that would mean exposing this crack in your reliable image. And a lot of people have spoken about this, specifically suppressing struggles blocks emotional repair. It becomes a really powerful way to create distance between you and the rest of the world, especially your partner. The more that you hide, the more the relationship ends up feeling hollow. And your partner may not be able to know it specifically, but at the back of their mind, they're feeling this constant inauthenticity. You're not being quite honest about what you're going through because no one's life is completely perfect, right? No one is flawless. No one has struggles. And over time, especially if you're trying to repair a relationship, you end up creating more of a distance and you both end up feeling lonely, even if you're together. And this is also backed up by what we call self-multiplicity theory, which talks about how we hide vulnerable parts behind this perfect self-state. And this blocks the ability to repair these discords. So when you refuse to show your flaws, you deny your partner the chance to respond with any sort of empathy or support, right? If you're not being honest about where you're struggling, your partner can't empathize with you because everything's perfect, right? So you don't have any struggles and they can't relate. They can't empathize with having no struggles because everyone has struggles. And this, again, has an impact if you're trying to repair a relationship with an ex-partner. If you're going throughout life pretending that everything's perfect, putting on this mask, not ever talking about the struggles that you've had, it shows a real lack of humility because you're either in denial about having real problems, you're not being honest with yourself, or you do know it, but you're lying. And that is one thing that blocks emotional repair the most. This inauthenticity, this hiding yourself, pretending that everything is great and you have no struggles, it becomes very difficult for a partner to really trust that. If you think about it this way, if you figured out that your partner was constantly lying to you about what they were going through, it would be really hard to trust because it's like, well, you're not even being open about it. So this happens when it comes to repairing the relationship and rebuilding that relationship. Because the truth is, emotional distance only gets smaller when both people risk showing their true selves. And this is especially true with relationship repair. Not pretending to be perfect means that you're also not expecting your partner to be perfect as well. Perfectionism slams the door on any sort of repair process. It stops you from having the hard conversations, from repairing after conflict, and from rebuilding real trust. This is what a lot of my members have found, is that pretending that everything is okay, pretending that you have no struggles, actually shows a real lack of humility, a real lack of self-introspection and building that self-awareness, because it shows that you're not really looking inside, or at least it comes across that way. And a partner really struggles to draw closer to that, right? It actually becomes the anti-attraction. It becomes more repellent than anything else. So it's really crucial to know that perfectionism breeds isolation. You end up trading authenticity for this temporary feeling of safety. It feels safe in the moment. It feels right to do. But over time, you end up losing any depth and any connection. And that's why perfectionism specifically kills repair. But perfectionism isn't always obvious. It hides in day-to-day behaviors that quietly sabotage this connection. So you may not realize that you're struggling with perfectionism. So let's talk a little bit about how to recognize these behaviors. So one of these behaviors of perfectionism is overthinking. Perfectionists ruminate until they freeze. They get into this analysis paralysis. You end up getting stuck and unable to make any even sort of simple decisions. So instead of addressing any problems or having the tough conversations about repairing the relationship or taking any accountability, you end up stalling. You end up holding off on having any conversations. And this kills attraction because it looks like you're not even assertive enough to be able to address the tough conversations, right? You end up leaving any sort of emotional repair up to them, and they end up having to deal with it themselves. They end up feeling in limbo. So this constant hesitation and overthinking ends up creating more confusion and more frustration, and it makes problems fester instead of getting resolved. So perfectionism can really, I don't want to understate this, it can really screw things up. It can really screw up relationship repair. And especially, I know I've mentioned this a few times, but especially when you're trying to win back your partner and rebuild that relationship, this perfectionism, overthinking shows up and causes more problems. But then perfectionism also shows up as an inner critic. This merciless inner voice at the back of your mind not only chisels away at yourself, but it ends up leaking out onto your partner. You end up nitpicking on small mistakes to avoid this pain of rejection. You end up scolding them about dishes loaded in the dishwasher, but it's not about cleanliness. It's more about a power play to avoid the shame of being wrong. This drive for flawlessness, this nitpicking, this micromanagement becomes a pattern of control. And the partner on the receiving end of it ends up feeling judged, never good enough, not able to breathe and relax and be themselves. And you end up looking like a hypocrite. because you're expecting perfection, but you're not living it because no one is perfect, right? So this isn't just about order, it's about self-protection at the cost of intimacy. But then there's also defensiveness and reactivity. And this is a really difficult one for a lot of people. It can be a struggle sometimes, but receiving feedback, even if it's gentle, this can get twisted into a threat. The perfectionist reacts really fast and shuts down any conversations or lashes out. And maybe this is something that you've experienced yourself, is that when you're receiving negative feedback, this automatic reaction of denial or defensiveness, this in itself is a form of perfectionism. You don't want to be seen as imperfect, so you block out any feedback, and this blocks any emotional repair. No one feels safe enough to be honest around you. So maybe if you're sat there thinking, well, I'm really good at receiving feedback. No one ever gives me feedback because I do things so well. Maybe ask yourself, do they have feedback to give me? But maybe they're not presenting it because I'm not very good at receiving it. Something to think about. And this cycle ends up repeating. You become critical of other people. They become critical of you. Walls get built up. Trust starts to break down. And it becomes a vicious cycle in a relationship. But then most of all, this perfectionism can start to manifest as chasing validation. I work with a lot of members who didn't even realize at first how much they seek validation from sources outside themselves. We're human beings. It feels nice to get validation, but oftentimes we can fall into these traps of requiring validation from other people because we're unable to generate it ourselves. And this is a perfectionist tendency, that we need everyone else to tell us that we're doing really well, to pat us on the back, because we can't sort of generate it ourselves. And this often leads to emotional discords in relationships. It leads to a misalignment within the relationship because your partner starts to feel exhausted because you're constantly needing to be told that you're doing really well. And over time, this can become quite draining to a partner. And especially if you're trying to repair a relationship, maybe this is a habit that you've fallen into, or maybe this is a habit that you've built since a breakup. You know, needing to hear good things from your partner, needing to hear that your changes are really good and you're doing really well. That need for validation can actually create more distance and stop an ex from wanting to come back and return to you because they think this is going to be a process. This is going to be a lot of effort because I constantly have to pat them on the back. They can't figure it out for themselves. And if you do want to join the members and I, then join my relationship bootcamp where you'll learn the same steps and tools that all of my members start with. Start looking at relationship repair in a different way to be able to take more effective steps in growing the relationship in the right direction. Like I said, if you do want to join us, all you have to do is click on the link in the description down below. So start to ask yourself these important perfectionism questions. Ask yourself, am I struggling with chasing validation? Am I always looking for positive feedback? Am I bad at receiving negative feedback? Do I expect other people to be perfect when I'm not perfect myself? Asking yourself these questions allows you to start implementing more effective steps moving forward in order to change the way that you do things moving forward. You know, this is part of a bigger toolkit. Understanding your own emotions is an ongoing process, and it's absolutely essential for repairing a relationship. I've done a deeper dive video into emotions and how much they have an impact on repairing a relationship. Ultimately, mastering your emotions, you end up mastering your relationship. It's a process, but it's an important one, especially if you're trying to repair a relationship. So I'll leave you with that deep dive video, and I will see you over there.